So welcome to the second webinar of the Somerset Green Open Homes. You should be able to see basically a little agenda of what's coming up. So you've probably had a note on the top of your screen saying about that this is being recorded. This is being recorded, and that is because we want to share the experiences to the wider public. So we're actually going to record this, and once edited will be available on Somerset Retrofit Accelerator playlist on YouTube, and also once our website is finished, you'll be able to access it there along with case studies from the households today and other households that we've been working with across the project. So that's why we're recording. If you don't want to be on it, then please turn your camera off. Generally speaking, I know of let everyone turn the mics on, but I think it will help the way that I'm sharing the presentation if everyone can mute themselves during the main parts of the presentation, during the videos, because I think it can cause quite an echo if you leave your microphone on. In terms of questions, if you have any questions, I mean, there's not many people here, so after the videos, if you want to raise your hand, then we can probably take questions at each section. I have a few questions anyway, so I might ask a question that you want to ask. You can also put questions in the chat, so if it comes up during a video, and Cara will be monitoring that, and if there's anything you know, any good questions, then that can be put forward as well after each video. So as you can see in the agenda, I'll quickly explain about the project. Then we will hear from Serena, Henry and Michael, and then Jenna from CSE to tell us about Futureproof and what they do and why it's important. So what is Somerset Retrofit Accelerator? It's a joint project with all the district councils and a number of the town councils across Somerset, along with Somerset's Independence Trust and the Centre for Sustainable Energy. It's a pilot project funded by the Community Renewal Fund. My role is as project officer is focused on 2 of the 4 elements of the project, which I'll go into in one moment. The first thing is just say, what is retrofit? And here's one of the many definitions of retrofit. It's basically improving existing buildings, making them more energy efficient. And it's a big issue at the moment that we need to tackle. I know Jenna will speak more about that later. So the project is split up into 4 areas. The Green Open Homes, which is what we're doing today, showcasing low carbon and retrofit homes online, giving the opportunity for people to share their journey, share their experiences. That is one element. The other element that I'm focusing on at the bottom there is the Green Directory, which will be part of the website that we'll have, which will be accessible for everyone, focusing on Somerset, but will be useful wider than that as well. Watch this space. And then the other 2 elements are the Futureproof project that Jenna will talk about later on, where we have or had 50 discounted home retrofit plans across Somerset. And looking on the other side of the issue really is looking at industry and trying to kickstart that and help fill the gap, the skills gap across Somerset. And so there have been 30 subsidised or paid for places on Future-Proof Essentials course for the construction industry. And that is being done through the Green Register. So these are the 4 elements. So it's looking at creating demand and motivating people to make their own changes in their home, but also looking at how to meet the demand and create fill that skills gap in the local area as well. So without further ado, we will go to Serena, our first householder from Glastonbury, and hopefully the video will play and everyone will be able to hear it.
I'm Serena Rony Dougal. I've lived in this house for nearly 40 years. I first became aware of what I'll call the crisis that we are experiencing at the moment back in 1973 when I read a book called Limits to Growth. And at that time I joined Greenpeace and started to change my lifestyle. So when I moved into this house in 1983, I decided that I wanted to make it as eco as I possibly could and to live a lifestyle that was as close to what is now called carbon neutral as I could manage. And I've been working on it for the last 40 years. The first thing I did was to put a parkway into this kitchen, which would then heat the water and the radiators in the bedrooms and a towel rail in the bathroom. So that was number 1. And I still use a wood central heating boiler, which is much upgraded now, and will also do the radiators downstairs using a pump. So that has gone through 2 different stages. The council did the cavity wall insulation. That was back in the mid to late 80s, I think, maybe the early 90s that they did that. And I, at that point, also transformed the loft into a little place where my teenage daughter could then have her own bedroom separate from her sister. And we moved the insulation that was between the rafters to up under the roof and plasterboarded it off. Since then, because that never really worked very well, we've added extra insulation and another skin to make the roof so that essentially in the winter it stays warm up in the loft and in the summer it's not too hot. That was after I bought the house. We did that, and also since I bought the house we have put in the double glazing. So bit by bit all of the windows have been transformed into double glazed with proper draft proofing. And the final thing was to do the porch, which is now like a double skin, the front door, and then a super glazed outside, which means I can open the front door and all the sun and light comes in through the day, which heats the house. Basically the house is now heated by solar one way or the other. And in the meantime the PV panels are put up, and that means that all of my electricity needs now come from my own panel.
You had an open fire initially. Just wondering if you can explain a little bit more about the process of putting your wood burning stove in and how it, and also in terms of how it works with your stove and back boiler system.
Yes, so when I moved in, all the council houses had open fires with back boilers, so that was already set up with the pipes going up to the immersion tank that had a single coil in it, so that when you lit the fire, the hot water would go up into the tank. I then, when I put in the parkway, because the open fire wasn't at all efficient, I put the parkway in where the open fire had been and connected up to the pipes that were already there going up to the tank. And at the same time, I put in the towel rail and the radiators in the bedroom. Now, the radiators in the bedroom work on what's called gravity feed. So the heat of the water going up from the fire, which will then feed into the tank, will also heat pipes that go up into the loft, across the loft and down again into the bedrooms for the radiators, and then come back down into the pipes that are coming out of the fire. And this is a gravity system, so that whenever you light the fire, the radiators will automatically become hot if they're turned on. And the towel rail is a sort of fail-safe system. It's never turned off, so that the water in the tank doesn't ever get too hot. It always has a way of losing heat through the bathroom. And because I did that when I moved in the early 80s, I had a very friendly plumber who really knew what he was doing, and this was the design that he put in on his recommendation. And I have to say it worked really pretty well, although one had to sort of kickstart the radiators again every autumn when the fire was relit, because they sort of closed off over the summer when they weren't being used. But in general, it worked pretty well. Now I've got the central heating boiler, which is much more efficient. It's the same system, but we actually have a little pump that works for the downstairs radiators. They can't work on the gravity feed. And in general, when we relight in the autumn, everything just functions fine. It's a much better system now.
Right, thank you. Are there any other questions regarding that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the sort of insulation side of things, a bit more detail on that. Okey-dokey.
The cavity wall insulation was done by the town council sometime in the mid to late 80s, I think, or maybe the very early 90s. But they did all the houses up here on the hill at that point in time. And that, I think, was really the first step towards insulating the houses and making them warmer through insulation, and that means that one uses less energy when the walls are properly insulated. Just like having the roof properly insulated means that you start to use less energy, which of course means cheaper fuel bills. So now I reckon my fuel bills for heating the house and my hot water are about £400 a year.
Serena, did you or have you had any problems with dampness or condensation or mold before or afterwards? And also, have you noticed a difference in the warmth of the property?
I'll answer the last question first. Yes, there was a clear difference in the warmth from before the cavity wall insulation to after it. It was quite very noticeable. In terms of the damp and the mold, there's one part of the kitchen, the northwest corner, which is outside. I'm end terrace, so that's the outside wall and the northwest side. That was actually far worse before the cavity wall insulation, but we have never managed to get rid of it completely. I've done various things like an extractor fan for when cooking is happening, but even so, every spring I have to, do the bleaching to get rid of the mold. Maybe I should do a real proper job and take off the wallpaper and do a whole thing, and maybe it wouldn't come back then, because I think it's just the residual from when it was bad before we had the cavity wall insulation.
Cool, thank you. I mean, being an end of terrace, obviously you've got a lot of external walls, so it's important that is insulated. It will make a big difference. Thank you. Let's go up into your loft.
So here we are in the loft space, and what we did here was we took the insulation from between the rafters on the floor and put them up to between the beams in the ceiling and plasterboarded over, and that wasn't quite enough. So like with the bedrooms, we got that Kingspan whatever it's called, block insulation, and we put that up against the plasterboard and then covered over with the wood panelling. So this has got, you can see the width of it from the Velux window down through. This has got a huge amount of insulation in it, which means that it doesn't really get cold in the winter and it doesn't really get too hot in the summer. So what we've done here is the roof actually comes down to the wall just above the window, and what we've, in order to not lose heat through the roof where there's no insulation, because it's literally just a roof coming down to the wall, we've put the Kingspan, or whatever the term is called, this the block insulation with the silvered things, up against the ceiling, and then held it in place with the wood panelling, so that we've got insulation now for the bedroom, both with the roof above and with the roof coming down to the wall here.
Well, I thought I'd just go through those together because they seem to fit together as videos. Michael, Mick, you had a question earlier. Did you want to?
Yes, I did. It was just to do with the fan in the kitchen. I wondered if you tried a Humidistat Controlled Fan. That's a different type of fan, which can also be on a timer, but it also senses how humid the air is. So I just wondered that's something I've had to do for my daughter in a flat she bought, which had a terrible case of mold, well, actually that was because the previous fan wasn't working at all. But yeah, we decided to fit one of those, and it doesn't seem to have been a bad idea. That was the previous question, and just looking at your your bedroom, presumably that was already an angle in your bedroom which showed that was partially roof. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And if you look from the outside, you see how the roof comes down to just above the windows, and that is the way these council houses were built in the 50s. And so that's why when we did the block insulation up in the loft, we also did it in the bedrooms, because that made great sense to do that. In terms of the Humidistat Extractor Fan, I've never heard of one before, so thank you for that. I don't think that it's severe enough in my kitchen now that I would need to do something extra. I just automatically turn the extractor on when I'm cooking and there's steam, and I tend to have lodgers, and so I train them as best I can to do exactly the same when they're cooking. But it's a very good idea, and I think anybody who is going from scratch and doing it now should follow your suggestion.
Okay, thanks.
Serena, do you do much of the work yourself?
Yeah, all of this insulating of the loft, well, the making of the loft space in the first place, and then the extra insulation in loft and bedrooms was done by myself with the help of friends. And well, one was a lodger, one was a friend, and the actual making of the loft was a friend of a friend, and we did actually pay him, but he was not what one might call a professional. The only professional was the one putting in the Velux window, because of course that had to be done professionally. But because at the time of doing all this work, I was single parent, self-employed, and topping up my income with family credit, every single job had to be saved up for arduously, penny by penny, and so everything was really done on the cheap as well as we could possibly manage to do it. With, you know, we have a wonderful community here in Glastonbury, and the number of people one can call on to help is wonderful, and so that's how I have managed to do my house, very slowly, step by step, stage by stage, as I've saved up the money.
Brilliant, thank you, Serena. We will start and look at your windows next.
So what we've done here, these windows were one of the first bits of double glazing that I did in the house, and they were done in the late 90s, and it's really interesting to see how the width of the double glazing is much narrower now. And if we look at the more recent ones, we see that the panes of the double glazing are separated almost twice as much. And that means that although this double glazing is quite good in terms of helping to keep the heat in the house, the more modern double glazing is much better. A simple way to change the amount of heat in the house is to draft proof the windows. One of our major forms of heat loss is through drafty windows, and it's something you can go to a DIY place, get these little bits of foam and stick them on yourself, and it makes a huge difference to the warmth of the room. Originally this was the first bit of double glazing, and it's been redone recently by the same person who did my extension, so this now has the more modern double glazing, and one can see that the width of it is almost twice the width of the original stuff that we saw in the bedroom windows. So making the extension was the final thing that we did, and it has completely transformed both this room in terms of size, but also in terms of heat, because the windows are almost 180 degrees round. It's getting from essentially sunrise to sunset, and that means that the sun comes in and warms this room, which then helps to warm the rest of the house. So that in terms of having to use the wood stove to heat the house, it's now about 2 months less wood heating. So it used to be about 8 months of the year we needed the stove. 8 to 9 months now, it's more like 6 to 7 months that we need to use a wood stove because of both the porch and this front extension.
Any questions? If not, we will pop outside.
So I put these PV panels up in 2008, which was really, really early. It was one of the first in Glastonbury, and they are actually very low wattage compared with the modern ones. So it's a 1.4 kilowatt system. Nowadays the same sort of size would be about a 3.4 kilowatt system, but for my purposes they are sufficient because I put in eco fridge, eco freezer, eco washing machine, and so the amount of electricity that they make is sufficient for my needs. But if you go slightly to your right, you'll see the generation meter. There you go.
You mentioned having eco fridges and appliances. Do you find that you had to adapt your usage for when the sun is shining?
Well, I think it's all part of adapting one's lifestyle, isn't it? So when I had the PV panels put in, the installer gave me a little gadget that I could put into the socket for the fridge, or then move it and put it into the socket for something else. And I discovered that it was the fridge that actually was using the greater part of the electricity. It was way above anything else. And so bit by bit over the years, I did change my appliances to the more eco-rated ones, and brought my electricity usage over the years so that, well, the way it works now is the amount that I'm paid for what's exported, because I was before the FITS scheme. I was when it was the Renewable Obligation Scheme, ROCS. So all I'm paid for is the electricity that's exported at whatever price they pay me for it. But that money coming in equals the money that I spend for the electricity that I use in the winter and the nights and drawing off the grid. Now, if I was to upgrade, which would be a very nice thing to do, and get a more modern, cheaper panel installation, let's say the £4,000 one that Solar Streets or Sunlit Solar or these other people are offering. Then I would actually have a battery installed as well, so that there would be less usage of going on and off grid. And when there are power cuts, I would have my own power from the battery. Watch this space. It's certainly, should I want to upgrade, it's the next upgrade that I would do.
Cool, thank you. Well, hopefully we'll hear from Henry, who has done just that as well. So it'd be interesting to hear his thoughts. Following on from the PV, let's see what your Emerson does.
So this is the Emerson, which takes the excess electricity from the PV panels that isn't being used with the fridges and whatever, and it takes the energy through to the immersion heater, which is also where the coil is from the wood stove that heats the water. So we've got two forms of water heating, one from the wood stove, which works in the winter, and one from the Emerson, which heats the water in the summer. Super hot water tank, which has got 3 different ways of being heated. So there's one way where the pipes are coming in from, actually they're still warm, they're coming in from the wood burner, and that heats the water in the winter. And the pipes also then go up and across to the radiators in the bedrooms and the radiators downstairs. It's got a second form of heating, with the pipes coming in from what was the solar thermal, which was outside on the shed roof, and that would have been heating the water in the summer. So there's coils inside the tank which take the heat from either the wood burner or the solar thermal and transmit the heat to the water in the tank, which is super well insulated. But also it has an immersion heater, and here the switch is on all the time, because this is connected to the Emerson, which takes the excess energy from the PV panels and heats the water mainly in the summer, because mostly it's heated by the wood burner in the winter.
Mentioned about the different sort of iterations of solar thermal. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yes, it's been quite a journey. It would have been in the late 90s, I guess. I actually had a dream about black coils of plastic on my shed roof, heating my water in the summer, because of course you only really want to use the wood burner in the winter. But before I had the PV panels, turning on the immersion heater to heat the water in the summer was very expensive. And as I've already said, being single mum, self-employed, I didn't have many pennies to spare. So we tended to have to wash, etc., in cold water or boil a kettle if we needed hot water for the washing up in the summer. So to get hot water in the summer was quite a key thing for me. Now that I had a friend who lives off grid, and he tried to design something from my dream, the coils, the black coils on the shed, but it didn't really work. So we then upgraded, and what we upgraded to was a black radiator that my friendly plumber, who had put in my parkway initially for me, he gave me the radiator. We painted it black, we put it in a box, and we also had a little solar panel with it, so that when the sun hit the radiator and heated the water in the radiator, it would also hit the little PV panel, which would then turn on a pump. And initially we used a Renault car water pump, but in the end that didn't work very well, so we bought a purpose-made water pump for, you know, solar thermal type things, and that then pumped the water from the radiator through into the tank and then back out to the radiator again. And that way we had hot water in the summer from the sun, as well as in the winter from the wood burner. And then when I got the Emerson installed, which is actually really quite recent, it's one of the latest additions, that was when I had the extension built. We put the Emerson. I no longer needed my, by then we'd actually got a Mark III solar water heater, which was a proper solar pad. which again was recommended by my friend who lives off grid, and I can't quite remember where it came from, but it was quite expensive, and we built a new box for it. But we still worked with the same PV panel and pump to move the water around. It just worked slightly more efficiently than the radiator had done. One of the problems with the radiator was that although the water that was circulating had special chemical gunk in it to stop it from freezing in the winter and so on, the radiator did tend to rust, and that then all collected in the pump, and we had to get rid of all the rust. So the idea was to get rid of the radiator and have this purpose-made pad that was specially made for us. But the Emerson has done away with all of that. So I have passed that solar water heater on to somebody who has a little venture in some woods and needed a homemade solar water heating device.
Fantastic. Well, it's always good to give new life to things. So, and you're happy with the Emerson by the sound of it, the solar diverter.
Oh, it works very well indeed. And of course it works summer and winter, but because there's less sun in the winter, most of the water heating in the winter is from the fire, and then all of the water heating in the summer is from the Emerson, and it works sufficiently well.
Brilliant. Any questions? Nick?
Yes, you sound like a very early adopter, Serena, of all these technologies, and I'm really pleased to hear that. It almost makes me feel ashamed that I haven't been doing exactly the same thing myself. However, I wonder if you know a chap called Kieran van den Bosch, who you know him, do you?
Kieran was my lodger who installed the Kingspan in the bedrooms.
How funny. Anyway, I worked with Kieran, and he's got a business that recycles tents, but he also made his own solar powered shower tower to put up at festivals, and I've been one of his operators, and it's exactly what you said. It's a radiator painted black on the roof of the shower tower with the same thing you've got with a solar panel and a pump, and yeah, it's you should patent that.
Well, I got that idea from the Centre for Alternative Technology. They had little pamphlets out that told on how to do it, so they've got there first, and Kieran got it from me because that's what we had when he was living here. And I would like you to know that I've known Kieran since he was a toddler. I know his parents and I knew his grandparents as well, so the family.
Oh, lovely. Sorry, we shouldn't be talking about chatting, but he's turned his Camplight recycled tent business into a cooperative now. So I wish him all the best for doing that. Okay, thanks, Serena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Let's go to your garden then.
So my garden became a Somerset Wildlife Garden about 15 to 20 years ago, because I ticked all their particular boxes that they want. We've got a hedge here that is a hawthorn blackthorn hedge, which is classic field type hedge, and the rowan tree, and all of these give blossom and fruit for the birds and for the insects. And we have a holly tree here which also blossoms, and another holly to join it that gives us the berries as well. A mass of wildflowers, so there's Queen of the Meadows or Meadowsweet, there's woodruff, there's lily of the valley, there's knapweed, you name the herbs and the wildflowers, they're probably going to be in this garden. The lawns are cut. I assure you that I do every now and then mow the lawn, but we mow them less so that we also get the wildflowers, as you can see, in the lawns, which is good for the insect life, because insect numbers have decreased by 50% in the last 25 years, and that's really scary. So do your best to always have flowers at some point throughout the year for the insect and the bird life.
Yep.
So part of an ecological lifestyle is to grow your own vegetables as much as possible. It's a lot of hard work, but if you enjoy digging, it's your joy as well. and it does help to reduce food costs enormously. Part of an ecological wildlife garden is to have compost heaps. Not only is that where all the weeds go and the waste from the kitchen, but it also makes a nice warm environment for slow worms. And I do a 3-year system. You can see the one that's being built up. Next to it by on the far side is the one that's rotting down. And this one that's under the bags is actually ready to be bagged up, and I'm in process of filling up the bags, and that is the 3-year-old compost that I'm actually using in planting out and sowing all the vegetable for this year. And nettles are an important part of wildlife. Lots of butterfly species, their caterpillars eat the nettles, and nettles are incredibly healthy for us as well. And then we've got a nice old elm hedge here, which is part of the old field hedge system. And if you keep elm as a hedge, it will stay alive. If you let it grow into a tree, then it will die from Dutch elm disease. But keep it as a hedge, and then maybe at some point Dutch elm disease will pass, and then we can have our elm trees again.
You're so knowledgeable with your gardening. How did you get the Somerset Wildlife Garden sort of certification?
Oh gosh, that's so long ago. I've forgotten what the boxes were that I ticked, but I know part of it was having the pond. I know part of it was having wood piles. I know part of it was having a compost heap. And I'm sure that part of it was having a wide range of wildflowers and herbs as well. But I think that you wouldn't. I know some of the wildlife trusts will do different grades. I've just got a plaque saying it's a wildlife garden. But I know some of them will do like gold plaques or silver plaques or whatever. I slightly regret having my plaque because the deer decided that it was a wildlife garden for them too, which meant that I had to cage in my vegetables, and they even eat my roses and geraniums and tulips. So I think that was possibly a mistake on my part. However, it is what it is, and I do love all the birds and the dragonflies and the bats and, you know, all the other wildlife apart from the deer that enjoy my garden, and the slugs. I don't like them either.
Could I join in here? How do we do
Yeah.
this? Yeah, I just mentioned about the garden because I manage the compost in ours, and my wife's very good at gardening. And about 6 years ago, we found this no dig and no weed gardening, which the farmers are now attempting to do. And largely, it's a small garden. You might spend about 40 or 50 pound on mushroom compost, spread about 8 to 10 centimeters, and never dig the soil. And if you're really interested in gardening, and look this up, no dig, no weed. And what happens is the worms furrow through, and they create the sort of irrigation for water. So when you dig soil and you put it all down, you get leaching. So the water, all the soil has to sink down again, but it doesn't disturb any bacteria, and it's the latest thing. In the last 10 years, it's really been emerging. But all credit to you, Serena. I'm really amazed what you've done over the years. You evidently have researched so much, and to find that information, I know from experience that you just find out this or that and so on. And 20 years ago, I installed in a house in France, I installed ground source heating. And there was only 2 companies I could find in 2005 who did it. It was really quite astonishing. But now, of course, it's really taken off, and there's many firms that will, you know, advise about ground source heating. But yeah, I'm really impressed what you've done. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
We've just got a couple more videos. One, they're both actually in the garden, so we'll quickly go on that so you get a little bit more information. The first is more about the wood stores.
Here's the last of the wood that came in from a bit of woodland that I have a share in. So quite a lot of the wood that I burn in my wood burner to heat the house and the water through the winter, that I go down to the woodland, and any what I call standing dead wood or dead branches that have fallen onto the ground, I collect and bring them back. And that helps to reduce my fuel bills. I'm very lucky. I do have a woodshed with wood in, with bought wood, and that's where the cost of the wood, the £400, comes from, that heats my house and my water through the year. So here's the woodshed with the wood that I buy in. I used to be able to do all my own wood from my own woodland, but now that I'm in my 70s, I'm not quite as strong and energetic as I was. So unfortunately I have to buy in wood, but even so, it's way cheaper than running off gas or electric. So this is the water butt system, which is taking the rainwater off from the roof, which goes into one water butt, which then feeds into the second water butt, and when the second water butt is full, that then feeds down into the pond, which we will go and see in a moment. Important in a wildlife garden is to have a pond. You can see all the insects that are buzzing about over the top of it, and you can also see the pipe that is coming down from the water butts that helps to feed the pond. And we still just about have some frogs in the pond, but sadly their numbers are decreasing enormously year on year as part of the extinction of species that is happening at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Jim. You've done so much over the years, and especially, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I can't even think how you research things without the internet and everything. It's a different world now, I think. We're sort of so much information now. I mean, maybe that causes its own problems, I guess. A couple of questions I had. I mean, this relates to what I've just said, really. How did you find your product, services, contractors?
Mainly friends, actually. So the plumber who put in the original Parkway stove and then helped with the black radiator, etc., etc. He was a plumber who I had known from when the father of my youngest daughter and I were building a house out in Barton St David, and he was what I would call a very friendly plumber. He was always there to help me whenever I needed, and he looked after me incredibly well. The extension was built by somebody who I had, like Kieran, I'd known from when he was just a toddler, growing up in the street just round the corner from me up here on Windmill Hill, and so I can only recommend him. He did the most amazing job, and yes, and he was somebody who I'd known. Well, I've known him basically all his life. And then when we did the loft, as I said, it was friends of friends or actual friends or lodgers who helped me with those sorts of jobs. And the person who did the double glazing in the kitchen and the bedrooms, again, was a friend who had a carpentry business, and who lives around the corner from me. So just local community, really at every point. And I do believe in local community, because if anything goes wrong, you can just give them a phone call and say, oi. And also I think you get a better job done because it's, you know, they're friends of yours.
Yeah, and you know where they live.
Yep.
No, that's great. And do you have any further plans for the property?
Well, essentially when I did the extension, I felt that was it. But as I said, if I was to do an upgrade, it would be to the PV and install PV and battery system. which was something I wanted to do right at the beginning when I put it in, but the guy who put it in said that battery technology, this is 2008, wasn't up to it at that point. He was quite right, but now it is up for it, and people are doing the dual system. And I had planned that when that came along that I would do it. And of course, with the prices of PV dropping so dramatically as they have done, you know, it might be worth my while just to do a whole new system. But I'm not rushing to it. I'm okay. I've got all I really need now. I'm essentially carbon neutral in this house, particularly using standing deadwood from my own share in the woodland. There's very, very little that I actually buy in or use that is carbon generating. So, and I don't really at the moment feel a need for better PV, other than I get slightly irritated when there are power cuts and I don't have my own battery system. But it hasn't irritated me to the point for me to want to go out and spend that money yet, or to look at saving up to spend that money yet. Because now I'm on a pension rather than being self-employed single parent. So my income is a bit better than it was, but not much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think showing what you can do with you know, not masses and masses of money. I think that's really important as well. Does anyone else have any questions for Serena? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Thank you very much, Serena. Let's head over to Froome. And I've guessed that you're the age of your property, and I think I'm probably a bit.
No, you're wrong. Yes, it's a mid 1930s.
Yeah. I did kind of had that suspicion. I'd already written it in, and there you go, 1930s. So we'll play your video. It's just all in one video, so we'll play the whole thing, and then we'll take questions after that.
Hi there. I wanted to show you a few things I've done to my house. I found out about climate change in about 2008, and when I bought this house, I decided to do as much as I could with whatever spare money or even borrow money to do some work on it. Anyway, I'll show you some of the details. This is scaffolding that's just gone up because the bay window of the house is an area where heat leaks out because there is no cavity wall insulation in there, which is the first thing I had done. I had the whole house injected, but I couldn't do that because apparently it pops the tiles off. So there's a guy coming around to take those all off and insulate underneath it. I did have problems with the cavity wall. I'll discuss that later maybe, but it wasn't, the survey wasn't done properly, and what happens on the south-facing wall, you can see here the big wall that goes out 3 stories because there's a room in the roof. Basically there was rubble in the bottom of it up to about 500 or 600 millimeters, and that was allowing water through, so I had to call on the government warranty, and sort that out. I'll talk about that when I talk about the living room floor. Right, I'll just go round the back, I think. This is the kitchen extension at the back of the house. Was the coldest room in the house, and we've had it completely refurbished, and it's been insulated on the outside, and the floor and the new roof have both been insulated. Previously the floor was a concrete floor with lino on or something. It was just horrible. So that's been done. I'll just pause it. And this is the rear. So you can see at the top there, that's the room, the dormer. So we haven't done anything with that because it's probably quite an expensive job. It was done in the 90s, I think, again, and the drawings show that it had some insulation in. So that's for the future maybe, but it won't be a cheap job, I don't think. Right, we've got solar panels. Originally we had solar panels on the top of this flat roof and this garage roof, which is asbestos sheet, and neither of them were particularly suitable places, but this roof in particular was going to fail at some stage, and I'd been repairing it. So I'll show you the building that we decided to build in the garden to house the solar panels. This is a 6x4 building built on a concrete plinth which was made obviously the normal way, but we used recycled aggregate, and it's been submitted to planning department. They approved it. It's got a 25-degree slope facing south, so that's basically doing the job, and the 4 kilowatt system's on the top of that. It's doing its job properly. It has been for a few years now, and I'm glad I did it. It was a lot of hassle, but buying a house without south-facing roof did present me with a bit of a problem. Right, okay, I'll just pause that. This is the back of it, which is showing the rest of, or the last of the garden, of the greenhouse. And there's some water butts. There's 2 water butts on the greenhouse. There's one of my recycled wood stores. The compost bins, which are also from recycled wood. And this old shed's got a water butt on as well. So, and that's supposed to be, well, another place to grow things on. There you go. So that's us. While I was on wood stores, I thought I'd show you that's another one. And then I've just had to build a new one, and there's another one. So this is wood I've scavenged, basically. I've never paid for it, and it's usually 3 years old by the time I use it in the wood burner. So I think I must have an eye for finding bits of wood. This is the wood burner that I put in. Actually, it was the first job I think I did when I moved into the house. I couldn't bear the previous gas fire with its horrible surround. So that's a fairly efficient, it's 80% efficient, I think. I did install it myself without a liner, but it's a fair bit of work, and I'm not sure I'd advise doing it to anyone else. So yeah, in the evenings we sit here, and it's very cosy, and it does mean that the radiators down here anyway usually turn themselves off if we leave the central heating on, and that saves the money on the gas bill. So it's a sort of an exchange, really, wood for gas. And obviously the radiators in the rest of the house are turned down to a minimum, because there's no point in heating rooms you're not using. The other thing I did in the living room, which is a sort of 2 rooms knocked through together, was insulate the floor. I'll just briefly show you what I did. Because of the Sega warranty, every 5th board was taken up, because eventually they sprayed something there to stop the mould and the insect attack, and actually replace some of these floorboards as well, which I luckily had the opportunity to completely sand and reseal. But this is what I did underneath. Because it was impossible to put Celotex underneath, I stapled a tray of that silver bubble wrap you can get, which is in itself an insulator, all the way along between each joist, and then filled it with a rock wool so that made a hell of a difference when I came down in the morning after I'd done that. When normally, well, you'd expect a room to be reasonably warm. It was, again, it was fairly chilly, but this made a difference to the heat loss overnight. So I'm glad I did it. Lastly, I suppose looking at the future, the next thing I got planned is to get rid of this 16-year-old boiler, get rid of my gas supply, and put an air source heat pump in, which will take some, well, it will take a considerable sum of money. I just wanted to talk quickly about the air source heat pump, which is the next project. It's been costed. I've had about 3 quotes, and it seems to be coming in around 11,500 to 12,500, plus any radiators I need to change at about £250 each, and there's no VAT on anything at the moment, which is great. And I get £5,000 back from the government, so it's becoming a less expensive project, but still much more than putting a new gas boiler in, because my old gas boiler is 16 years old and inevitably will pack up at some stage. So I should have put in underfloor heating when I had the extension renovated, and had the CSE been doing the future-proof surveys, I would have benefited from that earlier on, I think. I'm fairly committed to the path I'm on at the moment. I know I could do more insulation to the bits of the house, and that's why I did the bay, really, because it's a sort of weak spot there. So I'm hoping that the other additional bonus of having an air source heat pump is because I'll have a hot tank, and I'll be able to link that to a diverter from the solar power, and when I'm not using that, I will have I'll have the advantage of topping up the heat in the hot tank, which should save me some money. I'm not under any illusions that this is going to be much cheaper or any cheaper than the bill I'm paying at the moment, which before all the prices went up was about on a direct debit of about £45 a month. I'm realistic about my chances of keeping the bill low. However, it will get rid of the gas, which is obviously a good thing to do, and I'll lose the standing charge of that, which is an additional bonus. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, it will all go well and it will be brilliant. Cheers.
Thanks, Michael. I had a couple of questions myself. Firstly, thinking about the insulation, and the first thing you did was cavity wall insulation, then you had some problems. Was it difficult to get the SEGA warranty to have that sort of activated, or to get a response? Did you have to jump through any sort of hurdles for that?
It just took far longer than I anticipated. They were very slow to react. They're understaffed, under-resourced government, Quango, I think, and they have to administrate all these warranties that people have had. And in the past, I mean, mine is a classic example. The rush to put insulation in people's walls, unfortunately, led to a few mistakes. Obviously, the survey they did on my house wasn't good enough. It should have spotted that. And what it did to my house, which was already, let's say, slightly compromised in terms of ventilation under the floor, it tipped it over the edge. And you know, I found mold growing out of my oak tool chest, which was in the understairs cupboard. And I thought it's like a sort of white mold, quite dramatic, really. And I thought, hang on, something's wrong here. And then I looked at the boards, and they were showing signs of wet rot. And so once I'd done that, then I had to go through the whole procedure of having another survey, and eventually it took ages, and they took it all out. And I had to replaster the walls and repair some of the floor, some new joists, some new floorboards. It was a lot of work, and yeah, I was in some ways benefited from that, I suppose, because I was able to access the floor in a way that I wouldn't have done normally. It's hard enough clearing your living room, let alone taking the boards up. So that was a bonus, if you like. It would have probably been better if I'd had all the boards up and put Celotex in, because that's slightly more efficient. That's that insulation that Serena was talking about. There's several brand names, but it's slightly more efficient than the Rockwool I used. But to be honest, it's done a very good job of insulating under the floor. Yeah, sorry, I digress, but you did ask.
Thanks. And then I was wondering about the kitchen, and you said that was the coldest part of the house, and that you'd done some insulated it externally. Was that a single brick? Was that cavity?
No, it did have a cavity, and it was supposed to, in the drawings, it showed an inch of polystyrene. In the 90s, that's all you had to do. But even that, builders hadn't even done that. So when it was injected, at least that helped slightly. But the trouble is the floor was so cold because there's no insulation whatsoever. Solid concrete floor, and the roof was probably some rather pathetic amount of Rockwool that had slumped over the years, and that was a pretty bad roof as well. So in the end, we just did a complete refurb on it. It wasn't cheap, I have to say, because we did change things around. But to be honest, in terms of being a useful space now, it's completely changed it. And I got rid of everything. I got rid of the windows that were taken out and moved. I got rid of those on free cycle. I got rid of the roof timbers. Someone else had those. There wasn't much, to be honest, that we didn't get recycled. Oh, and even someone, believe it or not, came for the kitchen. They picked the whole kitchen up, and it wasn't in any way attractive in my view, but they took the whole lot. It was amazing. So, but I think with that, the trouble is a lot of people don't bother because it's a lot of effort. So a lot of it goes in the skip. But yeah, if you try, you can often get rid of stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's great. It's like Serena, it's great to find new homes for everything, and one man's rubbish, as they say. And the other question was about your solar. Firstly, did you get any funding, or did you get the feed-in tariff?
Yeah, I got it just before the feed-in tariff ran out, and I put it on 2 unsuitable roofs, knowing that I would have to move them, actually. So although a flat roof isn't necessarily a bad thing to put a panel on, one of them didn't get the sun. The one at the back on the extension didn't get some of the sun until 12 o'clock midday, and both were completely unsuitable, to be honest. I had to reinforce the asbestos roof on the garage because I was afraid that people wouldn't be able to walk on it. And so I spent quite a long time putting timbers in there in order to take the weight of people, not the panels, but the people who would have to put them in. And in the end, they built a special framework to comply with building regs. And one thing I would say to people, and I'm a district councillor, so I shouldn't say this, but I complied with building regs, which have a height above a flat roof height of 300 mil or something. You can't have them that high. And there's a proprietary, I think I'm not sure exactly what it calls. It's basically a tilted structure that you can buy. I think they are plastic, and you can put the panels straight onto that. And that wouldn't have complied. And the guy would have taken them back at the end when I moved them. But I had a special framework built, which cost extra money, and I had to get rid of that at the end. Someone came for that eventually on the marketplace or free cycle. So yeah, it was a long, and then building the building to put the panels on. I mean, it cost me £1,000 to move them. So these things are all very well if you've got the money, but and I was lucky that I did. In fact, I borrowed the money to do the extension because, as my daughter says, you won't regret it, Dad. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So you've noticed a big difference in the performance then of the panels since the move?
I looked at I just looked at the readouts which I get, and they show that it probably made somewhere around about 0.8 of a megawatt, if that's the correct terminology. I always get confused. That's 1,000 watts, isn't it? As opposed to a kilowatt. Hang on a minute. No, I do get. I mean, I did A-level physics, but I still get confused about units. Anyway, my readout tells me I get about 4 megawatts a year at the moment, but previously I'd been getting about 3.2. So obviously varies on what sort of summer you've got. You know, that for me, I thought it was worthwhile, and I've still got spare space on that roof to put more panels if I want to. I could probably put another row on there. So yeah, I'm thinking about battery storage, but it is quite an expensive thing still. So that will be maybe something else in the future. And insulating the room in the roof, which again showed not a very high level of insulation, and so that could be another job on which Serena's done herself. It's well done to her. But you lose space inside as you keep adding layers. Yeah, so there's more work to do.
Thanks a lot. Does anyone else have any questions?
I just want to say, I think it's kilowatts you meant, not megawatt.
Well, no, 4 kilowatts a year wouldn't be any good, would it? So, so it's for the MW. Are they? Yeah.
It's a lot of
Yeah. Yes. Well, I get. Yeah, there is quite a lot. It's a 4 kilowatt system, so it does add up. Yeah.
I'd just like to add about insulation and insulated plasterboard. And I think Serena mentioned she'd use a system, but plaster in new houses, plasterboard has to be plastered to provide, I think, another 30 minutes of fire resistance. So what I've done in 3 of my rooms, you can buy this insulated plasterboard, which is about £15 a square metre. So a 3 metre square room doing the walls and the ceiling if necessary is probably about £700 on materials. But it's literally dot and dab glue on the back, and you just push them onto the walls, and then you dot and dab all the way around, and then just fill in the cracks with plaster, you know, like polyfiller plaster. And so for a room, well, I'm about £500 a room, my rooms, and the ceiling doesn't have to be done in bedrooms, of course. It's just the external walls I'm doing. So I've got 2 external walls and a lounge, which is going to cost me about £250. So yeah, so it's a DIY. I can put up insulated plasterboard and get immediate insulation, and I use 50 mil.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Jim. What kind of property are you in?
Well, I'm in a stone Victorian property, and it's a semi-detached, so the external walls are cold. Yeah. And I built extensions, and I've insulated that, and that's improved. But I'm actually thinking of putting insulation on the outside as well, which again is a little bit more skilled, but I have those skills. But certainly they say if you're insulating, put as much as you can afford. So if one's doing air source heating, which I'm looking into, then I'm going to make sure all my house is thoroughly insulated first. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks, Jim.
The only thing I'd say about that, if I can jump in there, is some houses, the breathability would be compromised. The breathability of the structure of the house. You know, I think naturally an old house, walls need to breathe. So hopefully you won't have any problems with yours, but it sounds like that might prevent the walls from breathing. But then I suppose a coat of emulsion does that anyway these days.
Yeah. I mean, because long as you don't render the outside stonework, then the stone can get damp and dry. But inside, not a problem. If there is a problem, then you have to vent. There'll be a gap behind the plasterboard of probably at least 10 mil with a dot and dab.
Oh,
And if
right.
there's a problem, you can put a vent, just a vent at the top and a vent at the bottom, and you get this circulation of air.
Mm.
But with stone walls, I don't get that. I don't know about new houses. Possibly, like you say, that's something to be advised about.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, and this is obviously something, if you're coming into this with not masses of knowledge, then looking at getting a retrofit plan done of your property would make a lot of sense to help guide you down that route. Let's move on to Henry. I'm not sure if he'll be able to talk to us, but if we have any questions, if he can hear us, perhaps he can answer in the chat, but we'll play the video anyway. So we are still in Frome, but with a 1980s terrace property.
I don't have much money, but I have general DIY skills and I have time. So my approach has been to do what I can myself as cheaply as possible. I enjoy the challenge of devising innovative solutions. All of them have worked, but some of them I wouldn't recommend. The two things that did cost us quite a lot of money were the solar panels and the heat pump. The panels I got through Frome Town Council's Solar Streets scheme. They cost around £3,000. I decided to have a battery as well, which cost another £3,000. I actually start to generate more than I use from around late March. The heat pump was a mere £1,600. The usual approach seems to be to replace the gas boiler with a heat pump, which often means installing larger radiators or underfloor heating, and this can cost £10,000 or more. In my small house, I have gone for a heat pump that simply blows warm air into my living room, the main room I need to be warm, and this filters through to the rest of the house. I believe this approach could work in a lot of houses, even quite large ones. Working down the cost scale, I've had cavity wall insulation. I think that cost around £300. I have experimented with various types of secondary or rather tertiary glazing. I've already got double glazing. I found a product called Track Glaze was cheap, easy and effective. You stick the tracks on the window sides and the acrylic sheets slide in them with stick-on draft excluders and handles. I've constructed my own tertiary glazing for the large patio doors, involving a 4-part wooden frame variously filled with insulation board and acrylic glazing, and a door at one end. I'm a great believer in curtains. In winter, when it's dark for 16 hours, they can make a big difference. These have thermal lining, are attached to the walls either side, are long enough to just touch the floor, and I sometimes pin them together in the middle with clothes pegs. I've also made an inner front door. Again, very simple design, just a frame filled with insulation board. These are all kind of work in progress. They work, but they are not yet nicely finished. I'm thinking I'll probably cover the insulation board with some kind of material. I want to keep it lightweight. In the back garden are 2 water butts, a small pond which had a newt in it last year, plenty of unkempt areas where wildlife can hide, and we are currently converting the large lawned area in front of the house into a meadow.
I'm just going to look at the chat. Right, I see. So you said that your 5 solar panels produce 1,700 kilowatt hours a year, which equates to 1.7 megawatt hours. So I think maybe that that can help Mick with your calculations. So that probably makes sense then. Perhaps if your system is bigger, that you can, it would be 4 megawatt hours that you generate. You didn't mention about loft insulation. Do you have a room in the roof as well, or have you installed loft insulation, Henry? And if you're able to answer in the chat. Yeah, so yeah, you do have a room in the roof, and there was some extra insulation, but yeah, I understand it's a bit difficult to explain any more detail than that. I know from chatting before that you've done lots of different secondary glazing options. The track glaze, I think, was your favorite, but I won't ask you to explain all the other different things that you did. And the air-to-air heat pump, I think for a lot of people, that's something that's a little bit different, that perhaps, yeah, an idea anyway for some properties that could work well. But I understand it's still quite new for you. You're sort of getting used to it. And do you have any further plans? You say it's great. Good. It's good to hear. Any further plans? Yeah, okay, tidying it up, making it look nicer. Fair enough. And actually, I know a lot of people. Serena, for example, would have been interested in your battery system. Have you experienced a power cut and got through that with power? Not yet. Okay. Well, hopefully, if you do, then that your lights stay on. Cool. It's a shame we can't speak to you properly, Henry. But I think Microsoft Teams has a mind of its own. Thank you so much for your video and for everyone's participation. Serena, Michael, and Henry. Now we will move on to learn a little bit more about retrofitting and the future-proof project with Jenna. Hopefully your mic will work.
Yes, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Do you need to make me host so I can do the slides? Because it might be a bit annoying otherwise for you.
It's okay. I'll try and keep up with you.
Okay. So yeah, I do have some slides, but there's not loads of us here, so please feel free to chip in with any questions or comments at any stage. And there's quite a lot of info on the slides, and I won't necessarily talk through all of it, and I'm sure we can distribute the slides afterwards because there might be some stuff you want to refer back to. So yes, I'm going to talk about low carbon retrofitting and taking a whole house approach. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about taking a whole house fabric first approach, which is some of the sort of buzz phrases we like to use in the retrofit industry. Talking a bit about understanding your home, some funding, which I'm sure will be of interest to many of you, finding contractors and advice online, and that should be in-depth retrofit advice and where to get it from. Next slide, please. So I'm sure I probably don't need to tell you this. If you're here, you probably already have a good understanding of sort of, you know, the why we want to do this, but I just thought there's some interesting stats to point out here, which is 14% of UK emissions are from household energy use. The UK has some of the worst housing stock in Europe, and there's also another stat which isn't on the slide, but you might have heard this before, which is that approximately 80% of all buildings that will be in use in 2050, which is of course an important date in terms of the transition to zero carbon, are already built now. So that's why retrofit is such an important thing to do. And then that little house graphic there just gives you an idea of kind of where heat is lost from different elements of buildings. Obviously that's going to vary from building to building, but yes. Next slide, please. So the whole house approach, you may have heard this phrase before. It's very much the kind of best practice approach within the retrofit industry. Taking this approach has come about as a result of some previous government funding schemes which took more of a single measure approach. So, for example, just putting in cavity wall insulation or just putting in loft insulation. So we heard earlier from, it was Mike, wasn't it, with your house where you, sorry Mick, where you'd had your cavity wall insulation installed inappropriately. That sort of thing did happen quite a bit when they're with sort of cavity wall insulation schemes. Some companies were set up specifically just to take advantage of government funding and didn't always do things as well as they should have done. So there's a whole new approach now within the industry to make sure that those sorts of things don't happen. And there's a sort of methodology around looking at your house as a whole. So considering the building fabric, the services, who lives in it, and also where it is. And also looking at maintenance and repairs first before you get carried away and start putting in lots of insulation and solar panels and things, making sure that your house is in a good state first, which is really key. Looking at connected issues such as damp and ventilation, which we've already heard about, and also taking this approach will help you to identify the order in which to carry out improvements. So if you think about your house as a system, you can think about if I do this thing here, how is that going to affect other things within the system? Maybe I've only got enough money to do this one thing now, but maybe I want to do something else in future. So I'll need to plan the thing that I do now to make sure it doesn't prevent me doing something else in future, which also Mick referred to earlier with the underfloor heating thing. So that's a prime example, really. So next slide, please. And sort of linked to this is taking a fabric first approach. So it's fairly self-explanatory, really. It's prioritising improvements to the fabric of your home rather than sticking in some fancy new technologies. I think people are becoming more aware of this now with all the talk about heat pumps. People have an understanding that your home does need to be fairly well insulated before you put in a heat pump. So the key is achieving even all-round insulation so that every surface of your home inside it is the same temperature. That's what you want to achieve ideally. That can be really difficult when you've got, like, for example, an older home that might have had a loft conversion done, say 30 years ago, and then an extension added 10 years ago. All of those different elements will have different thermal performances. So that's a really important thing to kind of think about when you're creating a retrofit plan for your home, is how to tackle all of those different elements so that they're all roughly the same at the end of it. Also thinking about air tightness, so that there's a continuous unbroken air barrier if possible, and then also thinking about vapour permeability, which is particularly important in older homes. So on the next slide, there's just a bit here about understanding your home. So whether your home is traditional or modern, we've sort of referred a little bit to this earlier. That's really key to thinking about the kinds of techniques and materials that you might want to use in retrofit of your home. So that it's not always that easy to make a clean split, but generally speaking, any home that was built before 1919 is classed as traditional, and anything after that is classed as modern. So that's the first thing to look at, is when was it built, and also whether or not you're in a conservation area, which is generally linked to how old your home is, though not always. And this diagram here sort of gives you an indication of, you probably can't see it, it's a bit small, but yeah, traditional houses were built with the kinds of materials that were sort of allowed moisture to move in and out of them freely. And they were also built in order to, well, because when older houses were built, this is obviously before gas central heating, so people heated their home with a fire. So in order for the fire to burn properly and for the occupants to not suffocate to death, you had to have lots of air inlet on the floors and around the doors. They were sort of designed in almost, but now we want to try and block everything up as much as possible. And of course, modern houses with increasing building regulations over the 20th century have been built to kind of improve the air tightness and keep all of the heat in as much as possible. It's really important to understand how your home was built originally, but then of course it's not that straightforward, because lots of older houses have had changes made to them over the years which change and affect the way that moisture and air moves around them. So somebody mentioned earlier vinyl paint. Yeah, that's a classic example of something that's put onto the walls of older houses that then means that surface isn't breathable. So there's lots to say about that subject. I didn't jump in earlier because it's a really complicated subject and there's quite a lot of different elements involved in what's suitable for your home, and there's not always like hard and fast rules about these things. Yes, anyway, next slide. So funding. So I thought I'd first talk about non-means tested, so this is available to everyone funding. We actually heard about this earlier, the boiler upgrade scheme. So this is a grant of £5,000 for an air source heat pump or a biomass boiler, or £6,000 for a ground source heat pump to replace an existing fossil fuel heating system. So this is the government funding that was launched in April. Unfortunately, it's not as generous as a scheme that it replaced, the renewable heat incentive, which you might have heard of, but that scheme was set up differently. You got the money back over a period of 7 years, whereas with this one you get the money up front. There's not much of it available, so get in there quickly, I would say. Hopefully the government will release more funding at some point. I mean, they've certainly had quite a bashing from the Climate Change Committee for their approach to this stuff. So yeah, hopefully there will be more at some point, but get in there now, I would say, if you're interested. I don't think anyone's mentioned the Smart Export Guarantee. So that is money that you can earn. It's not much, but it is some money that you can earn from your electricity supplier for exporting electricity that you generate on site. And also some local authorities have low interest loans for energy efficiency improvements, such as Lendology in the area that you guys are all in, Somerset. So you can have a look at that as well. Means tested funding on the next slide. I don't know if this is relevant to anyone here, but it might be relevant to somebody that you know. So a scheme that is just actually being launched as we speak, HUGS, Home Upgrade Grant Scheme. So Somerset, all of the authorities in Somerset are involved in this, and we're helping them to deliver this scheme. So this is funding for lots of different measures, and so fabric measures like insulation, but also renewables and heat pumps. This is available for people who are on a low income and have an energy performance certificate rating of D or below, and also you have to be off mains gas. But if you are interested in that, or if you know anyone who is, please put them in touch with us at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and we can give you some more information and get you started on that scheme. There's also some funding called ECO, and that's for cavity wall, mainly loft insulation. Again, you have to be on a low income, or sometimes you might have to have a health issue as well. And ignore that thing at the bottom that I said about SSEN Enabling Works Fund. That was from some slides I did in Wiltshire, so apologies for that. That's so ignore that bit. So yeah, with funding, it's really complicated. It changes quite a lot and it depends on what area you're in, depends on your income, depends on health problems. So just give us a call. Cara's put the number in there. There is some information here on where you can. So the Trustmark website is a good one. Although, yeah, Matt was talking earlier about the thing you guys are working on to find more local installers to you, which sounds amazing. But here's just some sort of national schemes. So the Trustmark is a sort of government vetted scheme for contractors to do this kind of work. There's also the micro generation certification scheme where you can find installers who can put in solar panels and heat pumps and things like that. And is there another slide as well? Yes, there's also lots of resources on our website, on the CSC website, which, yeah, on all sorts of different topics. And next slide. Yes, I've also some more links here to some websites that I use a lot, which you might want to take a screen grab or just jot down. Lots of useful information on all of those websites. And yes, I think finally I've got some information about Futureproof. So Futureproof is the project that we run, which was initially funded by the central government, but it's now we're now having to charge for our services because the funding ran out. So we are able to offer you a range of services depending on what you want. So we can either give you advice over the phone, or we can come and visit your home and actually draw up a proper retrofit coordinator plan, or a home retrofit plan as we call it. So we take measurements of your home is now, input it all into a model, and then we can create scenarios for different measures or different combinations of measures that you might want to install, and then the report will tell you an idea of how much they might cost, the amount of carbon that they might save you, and what they might save you on your fuel bills. We can also refer you to installers for certain measures, and we can give you the details of builders as well who might be able to do the work for you. In Somerset, we do have some discounted surveys available. So I checked with the project manager and there's 12 left. So get in there quick. And then they will go back up to full price. And Cara's really helpfully put the link in there where you can see more about Futureproof, and you can see the discounted price as well. It depends on how big your house is, essentially. And so, yeah, there's our phone number and our email. And I think, yes, probably not relevant if you guys are pretty much all Somerset. There are similar schemes in other parts of the country as well, just to give some examples there. And I think on my last slide, I've just got my email and the Futureproof email and website and things. So yeah, does anyone have any questions for me?
It said something about insulation, underfloor insulation, and I think it said under, if you have, is it on the page where it was people are on benefits or had a home you earn under 30,000 a year. Did I read that?
Yes, so that's the HUG scheme. So yes, underfloor insulation is so I think you were looking at the eco one there. Yeah, so eco is not particularly straightforward to explain. There may or may not be funding available for underfloor insulation, but there will be through HUGs, which is the top one, which is for off-gas properties, and that's for people who have a household income of less than £30,000 a year, or somebody's on a means tested benefit.
Okay, right, thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Did you have a question, Mick?
Yes, it was to do with eco. You mentioned quite hopefully there that you can just replace a boiler. It's not as simple as that, is it? Or is it? You know, I've got a 16-year-old boiler. If I'd wanted to replace it and qualified by having other measures done, would they have replaced my boiler? It's still a combi, you know, a fairly modern combi. So
do you mean the eco funding?
yeah, the eco funding.
It depends on a number of factors really. So in order to qualify for funding for a replacement boiler, generally speaking, you do need to have some sort of health issue or vulnerability. But yes, I mean, gas boilers are still being, oh no, actually, there's a new version of eco coming out soon. So yeah, so eco funding goes through various iterations every so often. The new version is called Eco 4, and I believe that there's not going to be funding for fossil fuels under that one.
Okay, yeah, I know it used to be hard unless your boiler had completely packed up, and then it was deemed okay to replace it. But yeah, that makes sense, I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Jenna.
Problem.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jenna.
Sure.
I don't think I have any questions myself, but I think it's really, really great your presentation and the offering that you have basically going forward. I think it's really necessary to try and help people on their journey, guide them in the right way, or possibly take them through the whole process. Cool. Well, thank you everyone who attended. I realize I haven't updated this slide. The next webinar is actually going to be in 2 weeks' time. Anyone that's interested, we will be talking about some interesting technology. One of the things that I hadn't heard before this was a heat battery, which is another way of using kind of surplus solar to store energy. So that would be really interesting. And the guy who'll be talking about that, he actually lectures in renewable energy, so he'll be very knowledgeable and have lots of statistics for us. So yeah, that's on the 21st of July. Anyone that would like to take part or have any questions or anything, then my email is there. Obviously, we've just talked about future-proof, but please do sign up. There are, as you mentioned, 12 left of the discounted plans. Our social media presence is relatively minimal, but please do follow us if you can, if you would like to, especially if you are interested in the future webinars. And coming soon, you can bookmark it now. It does exist. The retrofitsomerset.info website, that will be our website, and hopefully I will have lots of information and content, and it will be where the directory is, so you can find everything you need for your retrofitting project.